start recording. Sorry about that. So just to recap, if you're just joining the recording, yeah, we're talking about allegory. Faye did a great job of telling us, reminding us what that is, which is a story that uses um, a symbol to portray a bigger meaning or a bigger theme, you know, and kind of, uses that symbol as a metaphor for something else. So the story that we are going to read for checkpoint two is called My Life with the Wave. All right. Before we dig into this, I want to know, and I'll put this question in the chat too. Do you have any predictions as to what um, the wave in the story is going to symbolize? If I can learn how to spell. So we already know that an allegory is a story that uses a symbol to tell a bigger story or portray a bigger meaning or theme. And we know that this story is an example of an allegory. So I want to know, before we start reading, what do you think the wave is going to symbolize, just based on the title? That do we have any guesses?
Iraqi, Iraqi like trauma towards some type of the water.
Okay, so maybe it's literally something to do with water that happened to him in real life. I also like
Yeah.
your idea about trauma too, right? Because when we think of a wave, there's a very famous Bruce Lee quote. If any of you guys know who Bruce Lee is, the kung fu movie star from the 70s. Um, but he has saying, be like water, because water can flow, but it can also crash. So you can be very fluid, but then when you have to be, you can be very hard. Um, but when you said trauma, Faye, that kind of, I think those two kind of go hand in hand, because waves can be like that. They can be very traumatic when they crash, but they can be kind of flowing and very beautiful before they get to
Yeah, like people see the ocean,
right, right, right,
and then some people die in the ocean.
right. So we'll see if maybe, I think it's a really good prediction. We'll see if maybe that is going to kind of be the case here. All right. Sammy, any thoughts from you before we keep going? But you guys are doing a good job. I appreciate you both hanging in there with me today. Okay, so if you have this pulled up on your end, that is great. I'm going to be sharing my screen and going through it on my end as well. All right. But again, you can access it right from Summit under the resources for checkpoint two, like you see right here. Okay. So I'm going to start reading this. You can follow along. Like I said, I'll be sharing my screen. And we're going to see how far we can get. We might be able to finish the whole thing because it's not super long. And then I'll kind of go over what we're going to do in checkpoints too. All right. My allergies are kicking my butt this morning. So if I stop in between for a water or a tissue, that is why, just to give you guys a heads up. All right. When I left that sea, a wave moved ahead of the others. She was tall and light, in spite of the shouts of the others who grabbed her by her floating skirts. She clutched my arm and went leaping off with me. I didn't want to say anything to her because it hurt me to shame her in front of her friends. Besides, the furious stares of the larger waves paralyzed me. When life in the city was not what she had been able to imagine, with all the ingenuousness of a wave that had never left the sea. She watched me gravely. No, her decision was made. She couldn't go back. I tried sweetness, harshness, irony. She cried, screamed, hugged, threatened. I had to apologize. So even just from that first paragraph there, what do we notice about the way the author is talking about the wave? Is he talking about the wave like it's a wave, or is he talking about the wave like it's an actual person?
Like it's an actual person.
Yeah.
Like
To,
it's a light.
yeah, exactly. Do either of you remember the type of figurative language, what that's called when we, you know, talk about
Figurative language.
close? There's a specific word that we use,
Metaphor.
not a metaphor, but when we talk about something that's not a real person, like it is a person, there's a word for that where we give human traits to, an inanimate object. Do you remember what that word is? I'll give you a hint. It has the word person in it. So it's a bigger word, but inside that word is the word person.
Personification.
Yes. Good job. So he is personifying this wave already. So that kind of already gives us a hint, and shows us how this story is already an example of an allegory because he's using the wave to represent something or someone else. Okay. The next day, my troubles began. How could we get on the train without being seen by the conductor, the passengers, the police? Excuse me. It's true, the rules say nothing in respect to the transport of waves on the railroad, but this very reserve was indication of the severity with which our act would be judged. After much thought, I arrived at the station an hour before departure, took my seat, and, when no one was looking, emptied the tank of the drinking fountain. Then, carefully, I poured in my friend. The first incident arose when the children of a couple nearby loudly declared their thirst. I blocked their way and promised them refreshments and lemonade. They were at the verge of accepting when another thirsty passenger approached. I was about to invite her too, but the stare of her companion stopped me short. The lady took a paper cup, approached the tank, and turned the faucet. Her cup was barely half full when I leaped between the woman and my friend. She looked at me in astonishment. When I apologized, one of the children turned the faucet again. I closed it violently. The lady brought the cup to her lips. Ah, this water is salty. The boy echoed her. Various passengers rose. The husband called the conductor. The man put salt in the water, because again, remember, it's a wave, so salt water. The conductor called the inspector. So you've placed substances in the water. And the inspector called the police. So you've poisoned the water. The police, in turn, called the captain. So you're the poisoner. The captain called 3 agents. The agents took me to an empty car amidst the stares and whispers of the passengers. At the next station, they took me off and dragged me to jail. For days, no one spoke to me except during the long interrogations. No one believed me when I explained my story, not even the jailer, who shook his head, saying, "The case is grave, truly grave. You weren't trying to poison children?" One day they brought me before the magistrate. "Your case is difficult," he repeated. "I will assign you to the penal judge." A year passed. Finally, they tried me. As there were no victims, my sentence was light. After a short time, my day of freedom arrived. The warden called me in. "Well, now you're free. You were lucky. Lucky there were no victims. But don't let it happen again, because the next time you'll really pay for it." And he stared at me with the same solemn stare with which everyone watched me. That same afternoon, I took the train and, after hours of uncomfortable traveling, arrived in Mexico City. I took a cab home. At the door of my apartment, I heard laughter and singing. I felt a pain in my chest, like the smack of a wave of surprise when surprise smacks us in the chest. My friend was there, singing and laughing as always. "How did you get back?" "Easy, on the train. Someone, after making sure that I was only salt water, poured me into the engine. It was a rough trip. Soon as I was a white plume of vapor, then I fell in a fine rain on the machine. I thinned out a lot. I lost many drops." Her presence changed my life. The house of dark corridors and dusty furniture was filled with air, with sun, with green and blue reflections, a numerous and happy populace of reverberations and echoes. How many waves one wave is, and how it can create a beach or rock or jetty out of a wall or a chest, a forehead that it crowns with foam. Even the abandoned corners, the abject corners of dust and debris, were touched by her light hands. Everything began to laugh, and everywhere white teeth shone. The sun entered the old rooms with pleasure and stayed for hours when it should have left the other houses, the district, the city, the country. And some nights, very late, the scandalized stars would watch it sneak out of my house. Love was a game, a creation. Everything was beach, sand, a bed with sheets that were always fresh. If I embraced her, she would swell with pride, incredibly tall, like the liquid stalk of a poplar. And soon that thinness would flower. I'm gonna scroll over here into a fountain of white feathers, into a plume of laughs that fell over my head and covered me with whiteness. Or she would stretch out in front of me, infinite as the horizon, until I too became horizon and silence. Full and sinuous, she would envelop me like music or some giant lips. Her presence was a going and coming of caresses, of murmurs, of kisses. Plunging into her waters, I would be drenched to the socks, and then, in the wink of an eye, find myself high above, at a dizzying height, mysteriously suspended, to fall like a stone, and feel myself gently deposited on dry land like a feather. Nothing is comparable to sleeping rocked in those waters unless it was waking pounded by 1,000 happy light lashes, by 1,000 assaults that withdraw laughing. So, how does his relationship with the wave seem so far? Does it seem like they're happy? What do we think? Are things going well?
I think he looked at the beauty of things.
Yeah, so it seems like she being the wave has kind of brought more of that into his life. And now he's kind of in a much happier place. Like he talks about, all the dusty corners and the dark corridors of my house. Now they're filled with light and happiness. And so it's
And he
kind of
talked about the sun, the moon, the
right.
sky.
So think about like, when you're in a new relationship, maybe when you're single, you're alone, you feel like maybe you're a little bit depressed, you don't really care about, the way your house looks, and now you meet a new partner and you're super happy, they bring you joy and levity and excitement, and that seems to be kind of what's happening here. So we'll see if that continues. All right, one sec. Excuse me. But I never reached the center of her being. I never touched the nakedness of pain and of death. Perhaps it does not exist. Perhaps it does not exist in waves. That secret place that renders a woman vulnerable and mortal. That electric button where everything interlocks, twitches, straightens out, and then swoons. Her sensibility, like that of women, spread in ripples. Only they weren't uh, concentric ripples, but rather eccentric ones that spread further each time until they touched other galaxies. To love her was to extend to remote contacts, to vibrate with far off stars we never suspect. But her center, no, she had no center, just an emptiness like a whirlwind that sucked me in and smothered me. Stretched out side by side, we exchanged confidences, whispers, smiles. Curled up, she fell on my chest and unfolded there like a vegetation of murmurs. She sang in my ear, a little seashell. She became humble and transparent, clutching my feet like a small animal, calm water. She was so clear I could read all of her thoughts. On certain nights, Her skin was covered with phosphorescence, and to embrace her was to embrace a piece of night tattooed with fire. But she also became black and bitter. At unexpected hours, she roared, moaned, twisted. Her groans woke the neighbors. Upon hearing her, the sea wind would scratch at the door of the house or rave in a loud voice on the roof. Cloudy days irritated her. She broke furniture. She said foul words, covered me with insults and gray and greenish foam. She spat. Sorry. Here we go. She spat, cried, swore, prophesied. She, subject to the moon, the stars, the influence of the light of other worlds, she changed her moods and appearance in a way that I thought fantastic, but was as fatal as the tide. So now we start to see, it's changing a little bit now. Okay, maybe she's getting a little moody. It's not quite as enjoyable as it first was. She began to complain of solitude. I filled the house with shells and conches, with small sailboats that in her days of fury she shipwrecked, along with the others laden with images that each night left my forehead and sunk in her ferocious or gentle whirlwinds. How many little treasures were lost in that time? But my boats and the silent song of the shells were not enough. I had to install a colony of fish in the house. It was not without jealousy that I watched them swimming in my friend, caressing her breasts, sleeping between her legs, adorning her hair with little flashes of color. Among those fish were a few particularly repulsive and ferocious ones, little tigers from the aquarium with large, fixed eyes and jagged, bloodthirsty mouths. I don't know by what aberration my friend delighted in playing with them, shamelessly showing them a preference whose significance I prefer to ignore. She passed long hours confined with those horrible creatures. One day I couldn't stand it anymore. I flung open the door and threw myself on them. Agile and ghostly, they slipped between my hands, while she laughed and pounded me until I fell. Excuse me. I thought I was drowning, and when I was purple and at the point of death, she deposited me on the bank and began to kiss me, saying I don't know what things I felt, very weak, fatigued, and humiliated. And at the same time, her voluptuousness made me close my eyes because her voice was sweet and she spoke to me of the delicious death of the drowned. When I came to my senses, I began to fear and hate her. I had neglected my affairs. Now I began to visit friends and renew old and dear relations. I met an old girlfriend, making her swear to keep my secret. I told her of my life with the wave. Nothing moves women as much as the possibility of saving a man. My redeemer employed all of her arts, but what could a woman, master of limited number of souls and bodies, do faced with my friend who was always changing and always identical to herself in her incessant metamorphosis? And so he's kind of comparing his human, girlfriend to the wave, who's also female in this story. But he's saying, the human one, she can only do so much. The wave is a wave, so it can always change, it can always adapt. And that's what he means by, her incessant metamorphosis. She's always changing, so it's hard to compete with. Winter came. The sky turned gray. Fog fell on the city. A frozen drizzle rained. My friend screamed every night. During the day, she isolated herself, quiet and sinister, stuttering a single syllable like an old woman who mutters in a corner. She became cold. To sleep with her was to shiver all night and to feel, little by little, the blood, bones, and thoughts freeze. She turned deep, impenetrable, restless. I left frequently, and my absences were more prolonged each time. She, in her corner, endlessly howled. With teeth like steel and a corrosive tongue, she gnawed at the walls, crumbled them. She passed the nights in mourning, reproaching me. She had nightmares, deliriums of the sun, of burning beaches. She dreamt of the pole and of changing into a great block of ice, sailing beneath black skies on nights as long as months. She insulted me. She cursed and laughed, filled the house with guffaws and phantoms. She summoned blind, quick, and blunt monsters from the deep, charged, with electricity. She carbonized everything she touched, full of acid. She dissolved whatever she brushed against. Her sweet arms became knotty cords that strangled me, and her body, greenish and elastic, was an an implacable whip that lashed and lashed. I fled. The horrible fish laughed with their ferocious grins. So what has happened now to the wave and to the author? How's their relationship changed now?
It's like she torturing him, and he's trying his hard to be there, but he can't take it no more, and he's getting upset. He's not understanding like the way that he did before, and it's making
Yeah,
him mad.
definitely. What is this? What kind of situation does this remind us of? What does it seem like is happening here? Think about like when two people are in a relationship. What does it seem like is happening here?
They're breaking up, they're having a fight.
Definitely having a fight, breaking up, or like you're realizing maybe you don't love somebody anymore, but you're still living with them. It seems very, very comparable to
Or
that.
you love them, but you're not in love with them anymore.
Right, right, right. So you care about them, but you don't know, you can't be romantically involved. That's good. That's a good point, Faye. All right, so we'll finish it up here. All right. There in the mountains, among the tall pines and the precipices, I breathed the cold, thin air like a thought of freedom. I returned at the end of the month. I had decided. It had been so cold that over the marble of the chimney, next to the extinct fire, I found a statue of ice. I was unmoved by her wearisome beauty. I put her in a big canvas sack and went out into the streets with the sleeper on my shoulders. In a restaurant in the outskirts, I sold her to a waiter friend, who immediately began to chop her into little pieces, which he carefully deposited into the buckets where bottles are chilled. So we can see what ends up happening to the wave in the end. She freezes and becomes a block of ice, and the guy, you know, gets rid of her, and now she has become, ice in the buckets where they kind of like put beer bottles and stuff. So why do you think he eventually ends up, we kind of just talked about this a little bit, but why do you think he eventually ends up getting rid of the wave at the end? What seems to happen?
I think he realized that the wave is not only can be good, it can also be bad. Because
Yeah.
I feel like he already had a sense of it once he already had to spend like a year in jail. And once getting out, then that was just something dumb, and that was when he was innocent. And coming out of it, just like getting out and going back to the situation of being in his own peaceful state, he didn't like. He basically didn't like the monster that she was becoming
Yeah.
inside his head, where it was affecting his life, daily work, and everything. So, as like anybody, he tried to go back to his old habits to find like what's wrong, what am I doing differently, or
Hmm.
what could be better. And after that, going back to her to see, compare and contrast, basically, what's the difference or how my life going. And after that night, it just kept getting worse. He probably tried and tried to make her calm down or try to understand her more or try to talk to her, but it wasn't no talking to her. It was all a game and she was the winner. So he didn't feel like that. He feel like I need control of my body. And the only way he could get control of both of them was to let her go free.
Yeah, I think that is a really great kind of summary. So here's the other side, and same if you have any thoughts, you want to put them in the chat, feel free. Um, why do we think, do we think that something happened with the wave to make her kind of change like that? Why might she have changed and become so kind of like mean and callous and stuff like that? Do we have any thoughts on that?
Maybe because of season, because he did say like fogginess and
Yeah.
cold. When she got cold, she would get shivering to the point where it feel like body is fire on his bones
So
and
the
that is
sea,
eating his flesh away. So I feel as though when the sea changes, it gives a different type of noise or a different type of presence. It gives a presence of anger with waves bashing against stuff and all that. That's why she turned into ice. Because
so it could
before
be
in
the
the heat,
seasons
she was
changing.
solid.
It could also be the season changing. Also think about, you know, waves, you know, belong in the ocean, right? So when we take a wave out of the ocean and we're trying to keep it in our house, what is the wave eventually going to want to do? Where's it eventually going to want to go back to?
To the ocean
The ocean, right? Because they know it doesn't really belong there. So
along there.
that could be, yeah, that could be part of it too, right? So she changes with the seasons as waves usually do, and she's also realizing like, hey, I'm a wave. That's why he says I had to buy her seashells and I had to give her fish to swim in her and all that stuff, because they're trying to make, they're trying to make it work, but they know, you know she doesn't really belong there and he doesn't really kind of belong with her. So all really, really good observations. And so, again, if we think about an allegory being a story that uses a symbol to kind of portray a bigger meaning, we can think about, we talked about this a little, already, what is the bigger, theme, or what's the bigger message that the author is kind of using the man's relationship with the wave to portray, right? And that is what, as I share my screen here again, really good job, Faye. That is what you're going to do when you look at checkpoint 2. So again, on Summit, um, under our class, checkpoint 2 right here, if you click the link in the box, it'll bring you to this page. So pretty straightforward. Again, just like checkpoint 1, only 2 tasks, okay? What you're doing here in the first part, all right, there's a bank right here with um, something from the book. Okay, you're going to take the letter next to each of these and put it next to the corresponding definition, right? Okay, so the first one here is Octavio Paz. So you're going to go down here to the key, and whichever one of these you think goes along with Octavio Paz, you're going to put that letter on the line right here, right? Just as a straightforward matching thing. So that's pretty easy. And then the next part, for kind of open-ended questions. So you can see I'm looking for complete sentences, all right? And these are just kind of summing up a lot of what we talked about today. So how is this an example of an allegory? Now, of course, you have to know what an allegory is to answer this question, but we already talked about it today. So that shouldn't be too much trouble if you've been following along, right? And then just some of kind of the other stuff. Why do you think the author chose to use a wave to symbolize this relationship? What are the
Acquires a wave mean how do the character like begin to like be with the wave? Like how they begin to meet and carry on from that meeting?
um kind of more so like, why, like, would why, if the author wanted to portray the kind of relationship we see happen in the story, why would he use a wave to symbolize that instead of something else? That's kind of what this first part is asking. And the second part of this question here, what are the similarities between the author's relationship with the wave and a real life relationship between two people, which we kind of already talked about a little bit as well. And then last question, what do you think is the theme or message that the author uses the wave to symbolize, right? So for this checkpoint to be totally done, got to have all the letters, got to complete the matching part up here, and then complete sentences answering all three of these questions. Okay. And I will be looking for this to be due when we meet again on Monday, because our second progress report for term 4 is coming out next week. Right. So that should be assigned to you all in Summit already. Any other questions with anything? How to do the checkpoint, where to find it? And again, don't forget, if you need to look back at the story to refresh your memory, you can show my screen again. Okay. You can find it right here under the resources for checkpoint 2 on Summit. Okay. So that's where you can find that. All right. Questions about anything, right? Sammy, how are you doing? I know you've been more following along today, but just want to make sure you're good as well. Very good. All right, and I believe in terms of checkpoint 1, Faye, you are good and all caught up. And Sammy, I believe you are still yellow for checkpoint 1. So make sure we are also working to get that finished over the weekend as well. Best place to start is watching the class recordings on YouTube and then kind of using those as an example. Okay, no worries, Sammy. I just saw your chat. Sammy, I would say then the best thing to do is just watch the class recording that'll be up on YouTube later today, and that'll help you recap what we did, read through the story, and what we're doing for checkpoint 2. Okay, which again is going to be due on Monday. And don't forget, no class tomorrow, so you guys got kind of an extra day to work on stuff. All right. So, any other questions before we wrap up here? All right, well, really good job today. We can get out of here a little bit early then, it looks like. So don't forget, checkpoint 2 due on Monday. It's going to count for the next progress report. No class tomorrow because teachers have a training day. And I think that's it. If you haven't filled out those surveys yet, make sure you excuse me, make sure you do that as well. And if you have any other questions or you want to come see me later to help get caught up, I will be in the Summit Lab from 1 to 3. Okay. All right, y'all. Have a great long weekend. Stay safe, and I will see you on Monday. All right. Really good job, especially you, Faye. Thank you.